I'm going to say something right out of the gate that is bound to piss off at least a corner of the internet right now. Scream 3 works. Not because it's flawless, not because it's secretly the best Scream movie. And this isn't a you're dumb if you don't like it or you don't get it sort of conversation. It just works. And the reason it gets treated like the odd one out is pretty simple. It's the entry that changes the flavor. See, I love that there are a lot of fans that are revisiting this one. They're realizing that this one's better, especially after we've gotten some of the legacy sequels. But at its core, this is a movie that I've loved. I remember when this came out, it's the first one that I saw in theaters, and I've always pretty much dug this movie. And the first two movies, see, they have this razor wire snap to them. They're meaner, they're tighter, they feel like they've got a little more bite and a little more grit. Scream 3, on the other hand, is different. It is broader. It is more Hollywood. It leans harder into comedy and satire and into the absurdity that this is now a franchise and it's less interested in shocking you and being predominantly a slasher movie. See, this is a movie that is still very much about horror, but it's horror through the lens of a satire and a commentary on Hollywood first and foremost, and then the slasher who done it second. I know that many have come before me and said the exact same thing, but it bears saying. How did these people not understand that they were basically outing themselves? Was it a situation where they just didn't think they'd ever get caught, or they were just too stupid to understand that they were commenting on themselves or greenlighting a movie that was commenting on them? But that's a whole other topic. To a lot of people, this whole movie reads as Scream gone soft, and I don't think that's what's happening here. I think Scream 3 is doing the thing that third chapters are supposed to do. It widens the lens, it pulls the story back to the origin point. It says that we've been laughing and screaming for 2 movies now, we're going to close the emotional loop. So if you judge Scream 3 by the standards of Scream 1, a lightning in a bottle, genre redefining original, you'll always feel like it's missing something. But if you judge this as a trilogy ender and as a film made in a very specific cultural moment, you start seeing why the choices make sense. See, even the original version of this, or at least what's to be the original version of this movie, before all of the production woes, sought to do the same thing, just did it entirely differently. See, again, Scream 3 isn't trying to be the first film again. It's trying to answer the question that the first one creates, but never really resolves. What does it mean to survive a story that the whole world turned into entertainment? That's the real monster in Scream 3. Not the mask, not the knife. It's the machine. The machine that turns trauma into content. And the movie is so committed to that idea that it builds the entire setting around it. The first movie is small town horror with a meta break. The second movie expands it into a public spectacle. The murders aren't just private terror, they are a cultural event and they are happening in a bigger scale. The third movie goes, all right, if this is a franchise now, let's go to the factory where the franchises are made. Hollywood. A movie is being made about the killings. Actors are playing versions of these people. Sets are built to replicate places where real trauma happened. That there's an entire industry built on the pain of these characters. And right away, that's a smart escalation because the third film doesn't need a new campus. It doesn't need a new town. It doesn't need a new small town feel revisited. It needs a new idea. And the idea is your life has been stolen, packaged, and sold back to you. That's why the Hollywood setting is not just fun, it is thematically perfect for a Scream movie. It's the story looking at itself in the mirror and going, okay, what happens when the mirror becomes a machine? And it also explains the tone shift because Hollywood is ridiculous. It is performative. It is egotistical and it is insecure. It is desperate and it is manipulative. It's people auditioning even when they aren't auditioning. So, of course, the film feels more heightened. It's in the one place on earth where reality is always slightly fake. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a production documentary, but I do think that we have to acknowledge something. Scream 3 is a movie that was shaped by the culture that it was made in. Late 90s into 2000, the industry was feeling real pressure around violence and around youth targeted horror, around what kind of slasher tone was acceptable. And it's not hard to see Scream 3 reacting to that by going broader and less vicious. Famously, there's an interview that has made the rounds on the internet of Wes Craven commenting on the fact that originally the studio didn't want any blood at all in Scream 3. And he's like, what are we doing? If we're not going to have any blood whatsoever, then what are we doing making a horror movie? This is also the entry where you can feel the burden of we have to land the plane, we have to stick the landing. Not just make another fun one, but cap everything off, land the plane. That tends to make movies safer in some areas and bigger in others. So the movie compensates more satire, more spectacle, more movie world set pieces, and less let's be cruel in the way the first movie was cruel, or intense in the way that the first movie was intense. And the reality is, for a lot of people, that's a deal breaker. For a lot of people, that is too much of a departure from the trajectory of the first two. But for me, it's part of why this works as a finale, because the movie stops being just a slasher and starts being an ending. It's not like they just forgot how to make a Scream movie. It's not like they saw what the first two were and just decided, you know what? Nah, we're not going to do anything like that. And I feel like sometimes this movie gets unfairly derided as if it was some kind of mistake that it has the tone and the setting that it has. So let's talk about the opening, because the opening is doing heavy lifting to start this entire thing off. Because I love it, and I wish we got more of Cotton in the rest of the movie. Opening on Cotton, it's a bold move, because Cotton is one of the only characters in this whole franchise who feels like he belongs to the origin story, even when he's not in the room. He's tied to Maureen, to Sid's trauma, to the media circus, to the way everything got turned into a story. And killing him early does two things. First, it tells you that this movie is not playing around with safety. Returning characters can die. The past is not protected. Second, it drags the trilogy's central theme right into the foreground: media, celebrity, and violence as entertainment. Because Cotton isn't just a person. In the Scream world, Cotton is a headline. He is a narrative. He is a figure that the public argues about, and that makes him the perfect victim for the opening of a movie that's about the horror of being turned into a product. And yeah, part of me wishes Cotton had survived longer, because he's such a uniquely Scream character. He is messy. The dude is literally doing scumbag behavior in the car, and he's opportunistic, but in this weird way, he's sympathetic and not sympathetic. And he's the kind of guy who could have become a real world wild card if the series kept him around. But as an opening statement, it works. It hurts. And it tells you what kind of finale that you're watching here. One of the smartest moves that Scream 3 makes is basically admitting what it's about. Because when the film lays out the trilogy rules, it's not just doing meta commentary for the sake of it. It's telling you, in a trilogy, the third entry is where the story reaches backward. It's where the hidden backstory comes up. It's where the beginning gets reframed. That's where the motives get bigger and more personal. So if you already don't like retcons, this is the part where you cross your arms and go, oh no. But I actually respect it, because Scream 3 is honest about what it's doing. It isn't pretending that it's not going to recontextualize. It's building that into the DNA of the movie. And this is where we slide into the Maureen Prescott element, which is where the film is darker than it gets credit for. Because underneath the comedy and underneath the Hollywood satire, Scream 3 is circling a much uglier story: exploitation, power, manipulation, the way that people get used and discarded, the way those things ripple outward into next generations. That's the kind of grown up horror that doesn't rely on gore to feel gross. The reality is, Wes Craven is a man that was so good at seeing the climate that he was in and being able to dial it in. And in a lot of ways, he was a couple of steps ahead of other people when he did the things that he did. And I think this is the first time that the Scream franchise is trying to do something a bit more elevated with its. Now, we talk about the past, we talk about the way that what we thought we knew is recontextualized, and we got to go one of the biggest points of contention within all of that, and that's Roman Bridger. I'm here to speak the truth, y'all. Roman is a good Ghostface. And I'm not saying that just to be a contrarian. Roman works because he matches the theme of the movie. He's not just a killer, he's an author. Even from the first time I saw this movie, that made all of the sense in the world to me. If these two that seem all over the place, Billy is so heady and he misses what's right in front of him, Stu is so erratic, how do you take these two and channel them? You have a mystery third. That made all of the sense, and it felt like an articulate expansion on the mythos, right? He's the guy tied to filmmaking, tied to control, tied to manipulating a narrative, tied to the idea that the truth can be edited into whatever you want it to be. In a movie about Hollywood turning murder into a franchise, it is thematically perfect that the killer is someone who thinks in terms of scripts and scenes and takes in control. It is so Hitchcockian. And Roman is also doing something that no other Ghostface in the trilogy does. He makes the whole thing feel connected. Think about this for a second. It's just a random person. It's just a random person connected to the original, right? Any of these explanations that didn't wholeheartedly tie everything together just simply don't work because it feels like almost a weird satire of the initial movie. Because the initial movie was connected, the second one was connected to that, and the third one needed to remain in that same vein. So the reveal here isn't just another random psycho, it's this trilogy has an origin point, and I'm attached to it. He's tied to Maureen. He's tied to Sidney. He's tied to the beginning of the story. So whether you love the mythology swing or you hate it, you can't deny what it accomplishes structurally. It turns the first three movies into a loop. It takes the chaos of the first movie and gives it a hidden hand. And I know that's controversial. I know some people prefer Billy and Stu as this pure lightning strike of randomness and teen cruelty. But from a trilogy perspective, Roman gives you something that the series otherwise doesn't have. A final villain that isn't just another Ghostface, but the Ghostface that closes the book. See, I see Scream. I think this is an area where Scream and Halloween so closely mirror each other because there is a world where the fan says the first one is so pure that you can't have a any expansion on it. Now, I will say that generally speaking, Scream 2 is a better received sequel than Halloween 2, and the third movies in the franchises are obviously wildly different. But as a whole, they are two franchises where the initials can be considered their own standalone story. And when you expand out on it, you immediately are smacked in the face by controversy on whether or not expanding it lessens it. And for me, all of this makes him one of the strongest killers in the franchise in terms of narrative function. Let's be honest here. The biggest criticism that Scream 3 gets is that it rewrites the past. And that's fair. But here's why it still works for me. It's doing a retcon in a franchise that's literally about sequels and trilogies in the way that stories get rewritten. Scream is a meta series. It is a series about how narratives work. And when the third film says, hey, your understanding of the beginning isn't complete, it's not betraying the series, it's completing the series' own logic. And again, the movie basically warns you that it's going to do it. And that's what makes it feel like less of a cheap twist for the sake of just subverting expectation and more like an actual storytelling device. Also, thematically, it's important that the retcon isn't just random. It's about family. It is about identity. It is about generational trauma. It is about what happens when somebody feels like they've been denied a place in the story. Those are finale level themes. So even if you don't personally enjoy that the first film gets reframed, you can still recognize that the third film is trying to close Sid's arc in a way that's bigger than she survives again. She doesn't just survive, she takes her narrative back. That is why I fundamentally believe that these first four movies, throughout Wes's time with the franchise, are so incredible in the overarching story that they play and the way that Nev Campbell illustrates all of that and the way that this story is allowed to morph and allowed to change shape over time. Because in the first one, Sid is still very rough around the edges. She's still naive in certain ways, but she's strong and she adapts quickly. In the second one, she's leveled up. She understands what it means to survive. So when it happens again, she's not totally caught off guard, but emotionally she's still traumatized. And you can see that by the fact that she's still wearing the Greek letters in this movie, and she's still carrying that wounding, which makes all of the sense in the world that she has then separated herself out from humanity. And she is trying her best to take the trauma that she has experienced and use it to help other people, but still staying away, still completely reclusing herself from life. And the theme and the imagery and the object lesson of the door being left open at the end, it works. You know what I mean? For what it is. And then in four, we'll get to where her character goes from there. But as a part of the interconnected universe, this is simply extending out the mythos further than it was before. But when we talk about Roman, we got to talk about the fact that he is the only one that is presented as a single ghost face. But we got to talk about that. In the final film, the reveal positions Roman as acting alone. And that's what the movie gives you. But there's a long running Scream 3 conversation in fandom that the movie feels like it has two killer DNA. And that there is a second Ghostface in the original scripting process, and that Roman disposes of them once they weren't useful. It fits the story in a very dark, very Scream way. Because if Roman is the one who sets the pattern, then a final chapter twist where he treats an accomplice as disposable is perfectly in line with the franchise's cynicism about partnership. The Scream killers do not tend to do loyalty well. So it's compelling to say that Roman wasn't acting alone because it makes Roman even colder and even more author like. And where do you think Billy got the idea of seemingly, double crossing Stu when he stabs him? That was done intentionally because Roman told Billy that in the 11th hour, do him in. That's why I don't agree with the queer coding of Stu and Billy, because Billy's always in it for himself. Ultimately, Stu is just a means to an end. So when you look at this, the way that all of this lays out in this movie, the original script had two killers. Angelina was going to be the secondary killer, and I think that makes all of the sense in the world, even in the context of the movie that we got. Because prior to that, there were a couple of points where the story makes a lot more sense if there was more than one Ghostface, and so if you have more than one Ghostface and you have this guy who is ultimately out for his own ends and fancies himself the master of puppets, then why not have him do away with the other killer? You know what I mean? Because even where she parts company from the characters in the way that she does, it still leaves room that she could be, separating herself out. And then in the Act 3 reveal, you find out that she's evil. And, she goes to meet up with Roman, and, she is done away with. And then Roman does the makeup for himself and, toys around with everybody that he's actually dead. So that way they don't realize who it is. So let's lay in the plane. Why does Scream 3 work? It works because it accepts what it is. It's not trying to recreate the first one shock. It's not trying to recreate the second one spectacle. It's trying to end a trilogy by turning the story inward, toward origins, toward family, toward the system that commercialized trauma in the first place, and toward Sid finally stepping out of isolation and saying, I'm not living in fear anymore. That's the point. The Hollywood satire isn't random. The meta isn't random. The broader tone isn't random. It's the movie widening the stage because the story is bigger now. They introduced the idea of the reporter writing the book and the book becoming a movie and the movie becoming a franchise. So, of course, we're going to follow up with this idea that that machine has cannibalized other people, and you're commenting on a character that already is shrouded in mystery. And so to bring it back to her and the idea of one generation paying for the sins of the past makes all of the sense in the world in a Wes Craven world. Roman as Ghostface works because he represents the ultimate version of what this trilogy has been building towards. This ultimate vision of someone who doesn't just want to kill, but wants to control the narrative of your life. And the finale works because Sid rejects that. She doesn't just fight a killer. She fights the idea that her story belongs to someone else. And that's why, even with the rough edges, even with the weird choices in places, even with the stuff that makes people roll their eyes, Scream 3 deserves more credit than it gets because as a trilogy closer, it understands the assignment. All right, y'all, we'll be back with number 4. Let me know what other franchises you want to hear me talk about. Until next time, peace.